3 armored trucks head toward different intersections, but only one of them is carrying $35 million worth of gold. So how can anyone steal it? Especially with a helicopter watching the trucks the whole time. For ordinary people, that would be impossible. But for a team of elite thieves, it just takes a good plan. 2.5 years earlier, John led a crew of professional thieves in Venice. Their target was a shipment of gold worth $35 million. First, they poured explosives into the river. Then they used rollers to spread the explosives across the ceiling. Right below that spot was the gold vault. They carefully covered a perfect square. Then they attached the detonator. Half the plan was already done. The explosion went off, and the vault suddenly disappeared. Security rushed over to see what happened. Then a bald man suddenly burst out of the river. The missing vault was already sitting on a speedboat. The guards immediately chased after them. They thought getting the gold back would be easy, but they had fallen for a trap. The real vault had never left. It was still sitting underwater. Seth spotted the police arriving. They had less than 7 minutes to get out. John immediately started working on the lock. Even underwater in a diving suit, he stayed completely focused. He could feel every tiny movement inside the lock. And before long, the vault was open. Inside were stacks of shining gold bars. But there was no time to celebrate. They had to move the gold fast. The crew loaded the bars onto small boards. Then they attached boosters to them. By the time the police reached the scene, the crew had already escaped beneath the boat. Meanwhile, Charlie was keeping the guards busy outside. He used his driving skills to pull off one crazy move after another. The guards chasing him had no idea what was coming. The whole crew escaped successfully. They eventually reached their meeting point on top of a snowy mountain. For the first time, they could finally relax. They celebrated their biggest score yet. They were already planning how to enjoy the rest of their lives. John gave most of the credit to Mark. Without Mark's nearly perfect plan, none of this would have worked. They had just walked away with $35 million without losing a single man. Everyone started planning how to spend their share. Everyone except Norton. He looked completely out of place. And before long, the real trouble arrived. After the celebration, the crew drove away. But halfway across a dam, 2 cars suddenly boxed them in. They were trapped from both sides. And Norton was behind it all. He had already hired a group of killers. He was planning to rob the robbers. But his betrayal was about more than money. He had crossed one of the biggest lines in the thieves' world. With nowhere to run, Charlie slammed on the gas. He smashed through the barrier. The car plunged straight into the lake. It was their only chance to survive. But Norton still wasn't taking any chances. He grabbed an AK-47. Then he opened fire on the lake. He kept shooting until John's body finally surfaced. Only then did Norton leave. But he had missed one important detail. There was an oxygen tank inside the car. The survivors took turns using it. They somehow managed to stay alive at the bottom of the lake. John was gone, but the rest of the crew survived. Mark had just lost an old friend and partner. So he began planning his revenge. Years of searching finally led Mark to Norton's location. His first move was to find John's daughter, Stella. He asked her to join the team and help take back the gold Norton had stolen. Stella had inherited her father's talent for cracking safes. In fact, she was even better. Give her 5 minutes, and almost no safe could stop her. She was now working with the FBI, but when it came to her father, she agreed to help. The revenge mission officially began. The next day, Mark introduced her to the rest of the crew. First came Left Ear. He was a demolition expert. When he was 10, one of his homemade explosives damaged his right ear. That's how he got his nickname. Next came Seth. He was the team's computer genius. He might look awkward sometimes, but when it came to technology, he was the real deal. And finally, there was Charlie. He was the team's best driver. Put these people together, and you had one of the most dangerous crews in the business. They started watching Norton's mansion from the outside. Their first goal was to learn everything they could, but what they saw inside was a nightmare. The mansion had an advanced security system. Armed guards covered every blind spot, and several vicious dogs guarded the entrance. Getting inside was going to be much harder than expected. Just when the crew was ready to leave, a familiar figure appeared on the cameras. It was Norton. He looked nervous. He quickly placed a box in the passenger seat. Mark immediately recognized his old enemy, but Norton had no idea what was coming. He drove to a black market shop. He was there to turn some of the gold into cash. There was too much gold to sell all at once, so Norton only sold 2 bars at a time. That way, he could slowly turn the gold into cash without attracting attention. Mark watched him for several days. Then he gathered the team to plan their next move. The biggest problem was getting inside the mansion. Charlie thought it was almost impossible, but Seth had already found a way. The next day, Seth took Charlie to a phone company. They quickly spotted a female repair technician. What they needed was a repair uniform and a company service van. That was right up Charlie's alley. With his charm and smooth talk, he quickly got the technician to lower her guard. Then he walked away with her van keys and a spare uniform. The infiltration plan was ready to go. On the day of the operation, Left Ear cut the internet line to Norton's mansion. The TV suddenly stopped working. Norton immediately called the phone company. Seth intercepted the repair request. Mark then called the property manager. He moved the appointment to an earlier time and arranged for their fake repairman to come over. Now everything depended on Stella. She was the only person Norton had never seen before. Charlie handed her the fake repair order. Mark attached a hidden camera to her uniform. Stella drove the repair van to the mansion. She showed the guards a fake company ID. After a quick check, they let her in. But the moment the van entered the property, 2 guard dogs charged straight at her. Stella was caught completely off guard. Luckily, Norton showed up in time. He called the dogs back. Then he noticed the attractive young repairwoman. His attitude changed immediately. Inside the mansion, Norton started showing off his money and expensive possessions. Stella played along. At the same time, she followed Mark's instructions. She quietly searched for the office. Soon, she found a small door beside it. She opened it without making a sound. And there it was. The safe was hidden inside. But Norton suddenly appeared. He blocked the doorway. He told her the cables were all in the living room. Since she had already found what she needed, Stella didn't push her luck. She pretended to finish checking the equipment. Then she sent the signal to the team. Left ear immediately reconnected the internet line. Norton turned on the TV. Everything was working again. Just as Stella was about to leave, Norton suddenly stopped her. She thought her cover had been blown. But instead, Norton invited her to dinner. Stella accepted. But she pushed the dinner back to the following Friday. Because that dinner could create the perfect opening for the next move. With the footage Stella had recorded, the team quickly built a full digital model of the mansion. But another problem appeared. The front gate was about 100 yards from the office. And the safe weighed more than a ton. There was no way they could carry it out by hand. Seth quickly found a possible solution. The hallway was about 20 feet wide. A normal car couldn't make it through, but a small Mini could. So they started testing. They loaded about 2,700 pounds of metal into the car. That gave them roughly the weight of the safe. Then Stella drove the Mini through a full-scale replica of the mansion. The car barely made it through. But the test exposed another major problem. The suspension was too weak. It couldn't handle that much weight safely. Charlie found a professional car builder. For less than $10,000. He upgraded all 3 Minis. The cars now had serious power, and their bodies were much stronger. Meanwhile, Norton was busy with his own plans. He returned to the shop where he had been selling the gold. The deal was almost finished. Then the shop owner suddenly mentioned the old gold heist. Norton immediately knew he was in danger. He pulled his gun and killed the shop owner. He was about to leave when another car suddenly pulled up outside. Norton panicked. He grabbed the gold and escaped through the back door. But the man who had arrived was no ordinary customer. He was the shop owner's brother, and he was also a powerful local crime boss. His brother had just been killed, so he wasn't going to let it go. He tracked down the middleman who handled the gold deals. After putting serious pressure on him, the middleman finally revealed Norton's identity. Now Norton had a much bigger problem coming his way. Meanwhile, Mark's team was ready. Friday night finally arrived. Norton left the mansion in his luxury car for his date. 3 Minis immediately moved into position. The original plan was simple. Blow open the mansion gate, grab the gold, and get out. But then something unexpected happened. The neighbors were throwing a huge party. If they used explosives now, the noise would attract too much attention. The crew had no choice. They had to cancel the operation. Stella was ready to skip the dinner too, but they still needed another opportunity. So she went to the restaurant and sat down with the man who had killed her father. But Stella was still new to this game. She barely said a few words, and Norton noticed something familiar. He recognized a phrase her father used to say. That immediately made him suspicious. Norton started connecting the dots. Then he grabbed Stella's hand. Her identity was exposed. At that moment, Mark and the others moved in. When Norton saw Mark, he couldn't believe his eyes. He never expected the old crew to still be alive, and not one of them was missing. Mark made it clear. They were coming for the gold, and they were going to take it back right in front of Norton. But Norton wasn't scared. He started mocking Mark. He thought Mark was still using the same old tricks. Mark didn't waste time arguing. He punched Norton, then walked away. The showdown between two master thieves had officially begun. The next day, Seth intercepted Norton's movements. Norton was preparing to move the gold. Mark immediately saw his chance. He had been trying to figure out how to enter Norton's heavily guarded mansion. Now Norton was coming out on his own. This was the opening they needed. Mark decided to hit the convoy on the road. Everyone started preparing, but Charlie had doubts. There were several routes to the airport. They couldn't possibly cover them all. Mark already had an answer. Seth had hacked into Los Angeles's traffic signal system. With a few keystrokes, he could control the lights and force the convoy onto a specific route. Left Ear had already planted explosives inside the tunnel along that route. Every piece of the plan was ready. All they had to do was wait. It was 4 in the afternoon. Rush hour was just getting started. 3 armored trucks left Norton's mansion. Norton followed them in a helicopter. He thought using 3 trucks would make the real target impossible to identify. But he had badly underestimated Mark. Mark had Seth check the tire pressure on all 3 trucks. The numbers quickly revealed which truck was carrying the gold. Now they just had to guide that truck to the right location. Seth started controlling the traffic lights. The convoy had no choice but to follow the route. The gold truck eventually reached the planned location. At the same time, the helicopter's view was blocked by a group of tall buildings. By the time the helicopter had a clear view again, the truck was already gone. Norton had no idea what had happened. Meanwhile, Mark's crew was already inside the tunnel. They immediately started the next phase. Charlie dealt with the driver. Charlie handled the truck door, but once they opened it, they realized Norton had prepared another surprise. He had replaced the safe with an even more advanced one. This safe was much harder to crack. Luckily, Stella had inherited her father's skills. She carefully felt the lock mechanism with her fingertips. Under intense pressure, she finally cracked it. The safe opened, and it was packed with gold. Norton had already spent some of it, but because gold prices had gone up, the remaining stash was still worth around $27 million. There was no time to celebrate. They quickly loaded the gold into the cars. 3 minis raced through the tunnel, but Norton's hired guns were already closing in. Charlie pushed the cars to their limit. He slammed the wheel, and sent one of the pursuing vehicles crashing away. Once they cleared the tunnel, he pulled off another sharp drift. The 3 minis sped away. Seth kept controlling the traffic lights. Every light turned green. The crew quickly reached their destination. They hid the minis inside a shipping container. Then everyone left the area, but someone was still watching. A man slowly appeared from behind the containers. He waited until the crew was gone. Then he pulled out a stack of cash. He paid off the worker guarding the container. The container door opened, but there was no gold waiting for him. Mark was already inside. Norton had fallen into another trap, but he wasn't ready to give up. He pulled out his weapon. He wanted one last chance to turn things around. Then the crime boss appeared. Norton finally realized who he was dealing with. He understood that the murder of the shop owner had caught up with him. But even now, Norton still tried to save himself. He offered the crime boss a deal. He even suggested splitting the gold. But Mark had already seen this coming. Norton had nowhere left to run. In the end, the crime boss took him away, and the stolen gold returned to Mark and the crew. The long-running feud was finally over. There may be no such thing as absolute justice in the world of thieves, but there are still lines you shouldn't cross. And sooner or later, anyone who betrays their own crew has to pay the price.